Britain does villages rather well. Thatched roofs and stone cottages, country pubs with real ales and roaring fires, Morris dancers on the village green, postcard stuff. But some villages never made it onto postcards. Scattered across these islands are places where the publican goes quiet when you ask the wrong question. Parishes where the church records mention things the vicar would rather not discuss. Hamlets where something happened and the land itself seems to remember. I have gone through county archives and local testimonies to bring you 15 villages where something is deeply and genuinely wrong. Now, before we dive in, if you find this helpful, tap that subscribe button. You will not want to miss what is coming next. Let us begin with a village that has leaned into its reputation so completely that it now appears in official tourism literature. Pluckley in Kent. Population around 1,200. It sits roughly 15 miles from Ashford, in the Weald of Kent, surrounded by orchards and farmland. Drive through on a summer afternoon and you will see nothing but a pretty English village. Drive through after dark, and locals will tell you that you might see considerably more. Pluckley holds an unofficial record as the most haunted village in England, with 12 documented ghosts in parish records and local testimony. The screaming woods near the village have become notorious. Visitors report hearing shrieks with no source. Dogs refuse to enter certain clearings. The specific ghosts are named and located with surprising precision. The Red Lady haunts the churchyard of St. Nicholas, said to be Lady Daring searching for her stillborn baby buried somewhere in the grounds. The White Lady appears in the ruined chapel at the Daring estate. A schoolmaster hangs perpetually from a tree near the playing fields. A highwayman meets his end repeatedly at a crossroads locals call Fright Corner. What strikes researchers is the consistency across centuries. The publican at the Black Horse has worked there for over 30 years. He does not claim to have seen anything himself, but he has collected testimonies from staff members who refused to close alone. Glasses found smashed in locked rooms, cold spots that move, the smell of tobacco in areas where nobody has smoked for decades. When asked if he believes, he simply says that he keeps the lights on. Travelling northwest to Gloucestershire, we find Prestbury, which disputes Pluckley's claim to the title. This village of around 3,000 residents on the outskirts of Cheltenham may be home to more documented apparitions per square mile than anywhere else in the country. The Black Abbot has been seen walking through the walls of Reform Cottage, following the line of a medieval path that no longer exists above ground. A medieval messenger on horseback gallops through Burgage near the old boundary of the Bishop's Palace. Residents who have lived there for generations describe a curious phenomenon. The apparitions are most often seen by newcomers, as if the ghosts show themselves to those who have not yet learned to look away. Long-term residents report a strange accommodation with the village's reputation. You stop noticing the cold spots. You stop questioning why your dog will not walk down certain lanes. You simply adjust. Heading further north into the Yorkshire wolds, we reach something altogether different. Wharram, Percy is not a living village with residents who might warn you away. It is a deserted medieval settlement, empty since the early 1500s, now managed by English heritage. Stone foundations mark where over 40 houses once stood. The Church of St. Martin remains partially intact, its walls open to the sky. What makes Wharram, Percy genuinely unsettling emerged from archaeological excavations published in academic journals. Researchers found evidence that medieval villagers mutilated bodies after death. Bones showed signs of deliberate breakage, burning, and decapitation. Academic interpretation suggests these were practices to prevent the dead from walking, the phenomenon medieval people called revenants. The villagers were afraid of their own dead. Farming communities in the surrounding area tell their children to stay away after sunset. Locals cannot articulate exactly why. The practice simply passes down. On the Suffolk coast, we find a village that is still disappearing. Dunwich was once one of the largest ports in medieval England. In the 13th century, it rivaled London in size and importance. 8 churches, 3 chapels, hospitals, monasteries, and a thriving population of over 3,000. Today, the population stands at around 120, and most of medieval Dunwich lies beneath the North Sea. Coastal erosion has been claiming the village for 8 centuries. Storm surges in 1287 and 1328 destroyed much of the original town. The process continues. Each year, a little more falls into the water. What draws attention is what locals and visitors report hearing during storms. The sound of church bells ringing from beneath the waves. Marine archaeologists have mapped the submerged ruins. They have located the foundations of churches on the seabed. Whether bells could physically ring under those conditions is another question, but the reports persist across centuries, documented in parish records going back to the 1600s. Fishermen who work these waters simply accept it. They hear the bells. They do not discuss it further. In Derbyshire, the village of Eyam presents a different kind of haunting. In 1665, a bundle of cloth arrived from London carrying fleas infected with bubonic plague. Within a year, at least 260 of the village's 350 residents were dead. What makes Eyam remarkable is not the death toll, but the decision made by villagers and their rector, William Mompesson. They quarantined themselves, establishing a boundary no one would cross, and preventing the plague from spreading to neighboring communities. Boundary stones still mark the perimeter. Holes carved in them held coins soaked in vinegar, the payment for food left by outsiders who would not enter. The Riley graves on a hillside outside the village tell the worst of it. Elizabeth Hancock buried 6 of her children and her husband within 8 days in August 1666, digging the graves herself because no one else remained to help. The village commemorates this sacrifice annually, but locals express complicated feelings about visitors who treat the graves as tourist attractions. There is a difference between remembering sacrifice and consuming tragedy as entertainment. The parish church still holds records of every death. The names remain. When you walk the village, you walk among ghosts of a different kind, not supernatural, but historical. People who chose to die rather than spread death. Now we must shift to something harder. Places where the darkness comes not from ghosts or plague, but from what was done to communities and to the land itself. Aberfan in South Wales. On October 21st, 1966, at approximately 9:15 in the morning, a colliery spoil tip on the hillside above the village collapsed. 140,000 tons of mining debris flowed down onto Pantglas Junior School. The children had just returned from assembly. 116 children died. 28 adults died. An entire generation of a village was taken in minutes. The Aberfan disaster remains one of the worst industrial tragedies in British history. The tribunal that followed found the National Coal Board entirely responsible. The tips had been built on springs, and warnings had been ignored for years. The memorial garden that now occupies the site where the school stood is maintained with extraordinary care. Rows of arched headstones mark children buried together because families wanted them to remain with their classmates. The village has made its wishes clear about visitors. This is not entertainment. The memorial may be visited respectfully and quietly. Photographs of the graves are discouraged. Survivors still live in Aberfan. They buried their children and their friends. When people ask locals about visiting, the response is measured. Come if you want to understand. Do not come if you want to gawk. The difference matters. In Wiltshire, we find a village that was stolen by the government and never returned. Imber sits on Salisbury Plain, accessible only on specific days each year when the military opens the roads. In 1943, the War Office requisitioned the village for training exercises. Residents were given 47 days to leave. They were promised they could return when the war ended. The war ended 80 years ago. They never went back. The Church of St. Giles still stands, maintained by volunteers. The surrounding buildings are ruins used for urban warfare training. Bullet holes pock the walls. Roofs have collapsed. The village pub, the school, the farms where families lived for generations, all abandoned and decaying while descendants petition for rights that are never granted. On the days when Imber is open to the public, you can walk streets that stopped being lived in within living memory. Some who make the pilgrimage are descendants of original residents. They walk through what remains of their family homes. They cannot stay. Tyneham in Dorset tells a nearly identical story. In 1943, residents received orders to evacuate in preparation for D-Day training exercises. The note left on the church door has become famous. Please treat the church and houses with care. We have given up our homes where many of us have lived for generations to help win the war to keep men free. We shall return one day, and thank you for treating the village kindly. They did not return. The village remains in military hands. The church and schoolhouse have been preserved as a museum. The rest slowly crumbles. The phone box still stands. The post office sign remains. But no letters have been posted for over 80 years. The village is frozen in 1943, waiting for residents who grew old elsewhere and whose grandchildren now visit a village they have never been allowed to call home. Far to the northwest, beyond the Scottish mainland, lies the archipelago of St. Kilda. This is the most remote part of the British Isles, 40 miles west of the Outer Hebrides. In 1930, the remaining 36 residents requested evacuation. They could no longer sustain their community. The population had been declining for decades. The specific hardships of St. Kilda defy easy description. A condition called the 8-day sickness killed most newborns, likely tetanus from the traditional practice of treating umbilical cords with fulmar oil. The boat cold struck virtually every islander whenever a ship arrived from the mainland, suggesting their immune systems had no exposure to common infections. Winter storms could cut them off entirely for months. What remains on St. Kilda are stone houses called black houses, their roofs fallen in but walls intact. Stone clates where seabirds were stored dot the hillsides by the hundreds. The Ministry of Defence now operates a tracking station there, staffed by contractors who rotate in and out. The village street is empty. The church stands roofless. When visitors arrive by boat, they walk through a community that chose to leave because survival had become too hard. The silence is profound. Even the seabirds seem quieter than they should be. In Orkney, Skara Brae offers a different kind of emptiness. This is not a village abandoned in living memory, but a settlement older than the pyramids. Stone houses, preserved under sand for over 4,000 years, were exposed by a great storm in 1850. The furniture remains: stone beds, stone dressers, stone seats arranged around central hearths. The passages between houses are intact. What happened to the people of Skara Brae is unknown. They simply left, or they simply ended. Archaeological evidence suggests the departure was not sudden. They took time to bury objects and to prepare. But where they went, or what drove them away, remains a mystery. Standing in those houses, you are surrounded by domestic details of lives that ended before Stonehenge was completed. The intimacy is unsettling. These were homes. Whatever ended them left no explanation. On the Devon coast, the ruins of Hallsands emerge at low tide like bones from the sea. This was a fishing village of over 120 residents at the turn of the 20th century. Then the dredgers came. Between 1897 and 1902, the Admiralty authorized extensive dredging of the offshore shingle bank to supply material for expanding Devonport dockyard. Despite warnings from villagers and from engineers, 650,000 tons of material were removed. The protective shingle beach dropped dramatically, and storm damage accelerated. By 1917, a single storm destroyed most of the remaining houses. The last resident, Elizabeth Pretterjohn, remained until her death in 1964, living in a cottage above the ruins. Today you can visit the viewing platform and look down at collapsed walls and empty windows where families once lived. The pub, the reading room, the chapel. All destroyed so that ships could be built elsewhere. Locals in the nearby village of Beesons point to Hallsands as a reminder. The sea takes what it wants. Humans should not help it. In North Wales, beneath the waters of Llyn Selyn Reservoir, lies the village of Capel Selyn. In 1957, Liverpool Corporation received parliamentary approval to flood the valley, despite unanimous opposition from Welsh members of Parliament. 67 residents were displaced. A post office, a school, a chapel, and 12 farms were demolished. Graves were exhumed and the bodies relocated. The valley was flooded in 1965. When water levels drop during dry periods, remnants of the village emerge. Stone walls, foundations, evidence of the community that existed before Liverpool needed water. The drowning of Capel Selyn became a defining moment in Welsh national consciousness. It demonstrated that Welsh communities could be destroyed by English cities without Welsh consent. The bitterness has not faded. If you ask locals about visiting the reservoir, some will welcome you. Others will tell you that you are standing on stolen land, drinking stolen water. Both responses are accurate. We come now to places where darkness takes human form. Pendle, in Lancashire. In 1612, 12 people from the villages around Pendle Hill were accused of witchcraft. 10 were hanged at Lancaster Castle. The trials were thoroughly documented by the clerk of the court, Thomas Potts, whose account, The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster, remains in print 4 centuries later. The accused were mostly poor, elderly, and female. Among them were Elizabeth Southerns, known as Demdike, and Anne Whittle, known as Chattox, along with their families and associates. The specific accusations included murder by witchcraft, causing illness, and making a pact with the devil. The evidence would not survive scrutiny in any modern court. Confessions were obtained through exhaustion and manipulation. Witnesses were children and rivals with grudges. Pendle Hill still dominates the landscape, visible for miles. The villages where the accused lived remain. Roughly is where Alice Nutter farmed before her execution. There is the site of Malkin Tower, where the supposed witches' meeting took place. The landscape has not changed. Fields still rise toward the hill. Farmhouses still shelter in the valleys. Walking those paths, you walk where they walked, accused of impossible crimes by neighbours who feared what they could not understand. The Pendle Heritage Centre approaches this history carefully. This is not Halloween entertainment. These were real people who died terrified and in pain. Visitors who come looking for witchcraft tourism are sometimes disappointed by the lack of drama. There are no cackling witches or bubbling cauldrons. There are only records of injustice and a hill that watched it happen. So there you have it. 15 places across Britain where something is deeply wrong. Some are wrong in ways that attract ghost hunters and thrill seekers, unexplained lights, documented hauntings, the atmospheric weight of violent history. Others are wrong in ways that should make us angry. Communities destroyed for military convenience and never returned, villages drowned without consent, industrial negligence that killed children, desperate people executed for impossible crimes. Britain's landscape holds all of this: the thatched cottages and the mass graves, the cream teas and the contaminated soil, the picture postcards and the parish records that document things too unsettling for tourism brochures. These places exist whether we visit them or not. Understanding them is part of understanding where we live. The land remembers what we prefer to forget. If you have visited any of these places, or if you know of similar locations that deserve attention, I want to hear from you. Comments from people who actually live with these histories are worth more than any archive. Tell me what I got right. Tell me what I missed. Tell me about the villages in your own area where locals still speak carefully, where certain questions produce silence, where the past refuses to stay buried. These stories matter. The places are real, the history is documented, and the warnings, whether whispered in pubs or written in parish records, are worth heeding. Please watch the video appearing on your screen next, and don't forget to subscribe.